Omar, I think you should unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Hi and good evening to all the participants and welcome to another webinar from Pakistan ASHRAE Society Lahore chapter and in collaboration with ASHRAE Central Pakistan chapter. This is one of the many webinars that we have planned for you learning and growth during this pandemic. I would also like to welcome Tim Mintz. Sir, good morning and welcome to this webinar. Today's topic of discussion is the ethics of money, binding, payment, application and change orders. In first, I would like to invite Mr. Mohammad Fahim Shehbaz, President, ASHRAE Pakistan, ASHRAE Central Pakistan Chapter for welcome note. Sir, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Awad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ASHRAE Central Pakistan Chapter and Pakistan HVACI Society Lahore Chapter, I welcome all of you in our today's webinar that will be presented by ASHRAE Distinguished Lecturer Mr. Tim Wentz on the topic of the ethics of money, bidding, payment applications, and change orders. I would also like to extend my thanks to the organizing committee of this webinar, which was led by ASHRAE Central Pakistan Chapter's CTTC Chair Committee, CTTC Committee Mr. Amir Abbas, and Mr. Abdur Rahman, who is President-elect. Okay, it's over to you, Murna.
Good evening, Central Pakistan Chapter. I hope this finds all of you well. Thank you so much for signing up and being a part of this presentation. It is I think a really fun presentation and at the same time a very important presentation for all of us. ASHRAE has asked me to start with a couple of slides about ASHRAE. So the first is about the Distinguished Lecturer Program. This presentation is being brought to you by the ASHRAE Society Chapter Technology Transfer Committee. There's more information on our website. Your microphones have already been muted by the facilitator, so we don't have to worry about that. There will be evaluation forms. ASHRAE is very committed to continuous improvement. So please fill out those evaluation forms and tell us how we can do better. We're always trying to do better with these programs, and by returning it to your CTTC program chair, we can do that. And just a quick note about ASHRAE itself. ASHRAE's made a tremendous amount of difference in my life. It made me a better contractor. I started out my career as a contractor. Made me a better educator when I went into academia. It's made me a better engineer. It's really broadened my view of who we are and how we can make a difference for our planet. And it'll do the same for you. So I urge you to get involved in ASHRAE, get involved in the Central Pakistan chapter, get involved in the region at large, get involved at the society level. I think you're going to find the same thing that I found, that it really makes a difference in your career. So here we go with our presentation. I've got some learning objectives here. We're going to talk a little bit about problem sources with this issue of the ethics of money. And we're going to talk about 3 separate areas where these problems manifest themselves. We're going to talk about bidding and scope issues. We're going to talk about payment requests, and we're going to talk about change orders. And then we're going to talk about how money can bend our ethics if we're not careful, and then some ideas on how to account for it. So one of the problem areas is all of us live in an environment where the industry is very competitive. Okay, it's very competitive. They have low margins, and that creates some financial pressure on us that doesn't exist in some other industries. And here again, it doesn't make any difference if you design and build buildings in Pakistan or the United States, the issue is exactly the same. Here's some interesting research from a Professor Aswath Damastoran from New York University, and he was looking at the United States and industries in the United States. And you'll notice here that our industry, engineering and construction, has an extremely low net margin. But of course, we know this. Now, he put it in a graphical form, and that's what I want you to see next. I thought this was really fascinating. So he took all the industries in the United States and he made the boxes, he scaled the boxes so they represent the actual amount of net profit. And so, and it goes from left to right. So here on the left, you see the high profit industries, and I don't think there's any big surprises in there. Banks, financial services, tobacco, alcohol, software, those have historically been high profit centers. So where's our beloved industry? Where's the design and construction industry? Well, we're over here in a box so small, we don't even have a label. And that does create some real stress for us as we start to navigate some of these issues. So because we're in a high margin industry, we have to take a risk. Okay, if we're going to be successful, and I don't care if you're an engineer, I don't care if you're an architect or a contractor or a manufacturer, all of us are in exactly the same boat. And I put this image of a turtle up. I live in Nebraska, which is a very rural area, and our Native Americans here had an interesting phrase that I use quite a bit. It goes like this: behold the turtle. It can only make movement if it sticks its neck out. Well, I mean, that's really the position we're in. We're only going to make progress in our businesses if we stick our neck out and take a risk. And this is sometimes viewed as an extremely difficult situation for a variety of reasons. You know, it's very personal. You know, when I talk to you about my ethics or industry's ethics, that's a very personal view of things. It's also extremely difficult to quantify. Okay, so how do you put a number to my ethics? How do you put a number to my ability to take a risk? And it's extremely difficult. I would tell my students, I taught at the University of Nebraska in construction management. And I tell my students right at the beginning, I said, you know, I can teach you the techniques of construction. I can teach you the strategies of design, but I cannot teach you how to take a risk. If you're not really interested in taking a risk, you might be in the wrong industry. And then finally, it's often flexible to an individual. So I have a story that I think shows that with great clarity. And there's a picture on the screen of a tilt-up construction process. So that's fairly popular here. So what you do is you make a wall panel as shown there, and you build it on the ground, and then once it's cured, you tilt it up and pin it into place, and that's how you build your walls. And there's these two people that did a lot of work together, had a good relationship, and they were very profitable together and made these smaller buildings using this process. And they always, you know, would get this project, and the owner would say, go ahead and start work, and I'll send you a contract later, and so forth and so on. It worked great. Well, finally, they decided to do a really big job. It was a government building. And same thing. They started work. The guy said, oh, I'll send you a contract in a few months. And they started work, and the owner, the one gentleman to this suit, ended up finding out that this contractor had increased his markup and had an extra $250,000 in the job, and he was terribly offended, and ended up throwing that contractor off the project, even though he had done 3 months worth of work. And of course, that precipitated a lawsuit, and I was hired by the contractor as a consultant for the trial. And so we brought this owner in and asked him in front of the court and said, why would you do that? You had such a good relationship with them. The contractor's name was Rick. He said, you got along great with Rick. You did all this work with Rick. What's wrong? What happened here? And this is what the developer said to the courtroom. I really like Rick. I really do. I just don't like him $250,000 worth. Well, that's a perfect example of the problems we face, right? Money bends ethics sometimes for some people. And here's a gentleman who had good ethics up to this amount, but after that amount, his ethics changed completely. And that is a difficult part of our industry to deal with. And so we're going to try and phrase some of our talk today about how we can deal with things like that, and how we should conduct ourselves. So how do we use our core values then to address things like we just saw? And I think we have to go back and look at our core values. Now, one things I like about our core values do not change. Core values are the same, in my view, worldwide. So it doesn't make any difference if you're building a building in Mexico or Canada or Pakistan, these core values still apply, and therefore we can use them to navigate some of the problems that we've uncovered. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to use 3 core values. I think there's 3 pillars of our industry. First one is rule of 750. Second one is 10 staffel. And the third one is 1 will get you 29. And that's how I remember those 3 pillars. So the first one is all about people. And that's really the basis of our industry, right? This is a people-based industry. It has always been a people-based industry. In my view, it always will be a people-based industry. It's all about long-term relationships. The really successful firms in our business, and again, I don't care if you're an engineer, or contractor, or manufacturer, or who you are, long-term relationships will define how successful your firm is going to be. And then it becomes incumbent then to mutually meet those expectations, and that's how you build a long-term relationship. It's based on win-win. It's not like that last story I told where it was win-lose. That's not how you build these relationships. When in my career as a contractor, I was blessed to have a number of long-term clients like that really became the backbone of my firm. And so I'm convinced that this is absolutely true, and it's a pillar of our industry. Now, I also have some research that proves it, I think, really well. This is probably my most favorite research of all time. So I use this virtually every presentation I give, because I think it's so important, and it's something we should never lose sight of. And this is research done by 2 gentlemen from Harvard, and they looked at businesses, and not just design businesses, not just construction businesses, all businesses. And they looked at businesses that focus obsessively And that was the word they used in their research, obsessively on meeting the needs of customers. And look at what they found in this 11-year study. So over these 11 years, they found those firms had their revenues go up 4 times faster, had job creation go up 7 times faster, had owner equity that went up 12 times faster, which was a big deal to me, right? Because I came from a small family-owned plumbing and heating company. So that caught my eye, but the one that really caught my eye is over that 11-year study, they found that profit performance was 750% higher, okay? That's the rule of 750. So that's amazing, right? I get asked all the time, and I give presentations all throughout ASHRAE's regions, and I get asked the same question virtually every region I talk in. Well, you know, margins are so small in our industry. How do I improve my bottom line? How do I get better at what I do? And the answer is on the screen. As far as I'm concerned, you can improve your profit performance by focusing obsessively on meeting the needs of clients. Okay, so that's our first guidepost on how to deal with some of these money issues, is make sure it's on, you're focusing on clients, you're focusing on people, and focus obsessively on meeting the needs of the clients. Probably the best advice that I can give you. So how do these money issues bend ethics, and how would we spot some of that, and how would we deal with that? And again, I'm going to talk in this presentation on these 3 items. There are other money games that get played in our industry, but these seem to be the 3 that cause the most trouble. So scope games, and we all have scope games, right? People want to add scope to our work, whether we're an engineer or whether we're a contractor, but they don't want to pay for it. Okay, we're just supposed to do this just because. And so perhaps they don't pay us for something that we are entitled to, or perhaps they try and negotiate us into doing something that's not a part of the contract. And it is deadly. It's deadly to our bottom line, because ask yourself this question: okay, if I'm going to do something that's not a part of the scope of the contract, where does that money come from? It's a money issue. And the answer is, well, it's going to come from my margin. It's going to come from my overhead and profit, because that's the only place it can come from. And so every time I do something without a change in scope, or if I accept additional scope without a change in price, my margin's going to go down. Well, you know, we already talked about how low our margin is anyway, and last thing I want to do is make it worse by making the margin lower. So right away, I've got another guidepost here. I know that I don't want to accept additional scope without a change in price. And that's going to be one of the themes. Scope and price must always be connected, because that is where scope, the money to do scope outside of the contract, comes from. Now, we've all been experienced in this industry, I presume. So all of us have examples that we could give where scope games or bidding games have been done by designers or owners or general contractors or subcontractors. It's a problem industry-wide across the globe. I hear from engineers and contractors in virtually every country that I speak in about this issue, and you've heard the same ones I've heard, no doubt. I put a few of them in that I heard quite frequently as a contractor, right? You're just about there. Okay, so I was a subcontractor. I called up the general contractor and said, well, how does my bid look? Well, you are just about there. In other words, I need to lower my price if I want the job. Well, I can lower my price, but then my margin is going to go down. Or another common one was, well, can you include the bond, or can you include this or that or the other thing for the same price? Because I really like working with you. You're such a great firm. It kind of sounds like that first guy that liked Rick, but not for 250,000. And then of course, they come in and ask for a change order, but they don't want to pay it, right? So that's the same thing. It's that same free game that takes away from our margin. And I'm sure all of you have stories that go along these lines, and some of those stories I think are just fascinating to hear, but it's an issue that we all face. So that leads us into the second pillar, which is ten Staffel. And I had an economics professor tell me that this was a principle of economics, ten Staffel. I always thought that was a Dutch word. It's not a Dutch word at all. It's an acronym that means there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That's absolutely correct. And sometimes we get into that trap where we think there is a free lunch. And everything has a cost in our industry. Okay, so if the owner wants the engineer to change some things around or add some extra services, that takes time. That's money. That's scope. That impacts our bottom line unless we account for it properly. Here's another one that goes right in with this ten Staffel issue that I see and hear all the time. Who is responsible for unforeseen and unknown conditions? And that's another very common question. Gets asked worldwide. Who is responsible for unforeseen or unknown conditions? And so my answer is an answer nobody likes to hear. The answer is it depends. Okay? It depends upon what you agree with. Okay? So if you sign a contract where unforeseen unknown conditions belong to the owner, then that's who owns them, and that is who has to pay for them. That would be typical in our industry, but I have seen more and more instances where they make unforeseen unknown conditions the responsibility of the contractor or a subcontractor or even the engineer. So here's a good example from the United States. This is what a clause looks like where it is the owner that is responsible for unforeseen unknown conditions. And this is typical. Okay? So I'm sure most of you operate under language that looks something like that. The problem is that you have owners that have ethics that are bent by money, and I work part-time in a design firm, and we have owners come up to us and say, oh no, I don't want to pay for that. I want the contractor to pay for that. And so really the one easy, simple way we can make the contractor pay for it is just cut that out of the contract. I cut that out of the contract. In the United States, the default is the contractor owns unforeseen unknown conditions. Well, if the contractor doesn't read the contract documents very carefully, puts in a bid based on normal conditions, all of a sudden they're doing all the concealed or unknown conditions for free, right? And we know there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And I know engineers and architects that do this in the hopes that that gets by. So is that legal? Is it ethical to play those kind of scope games with contract documents? And it's an interesting question, because remember that legal is minimalistic, okay? Legal is kind of the bottom shelf of behavior. So, for example, there's a law in virtually every country that I cannot hit you with a 2x4 board, right? Moreover, I can't even threaten to hit you with a 2x4 board. But there's no law in any country that says I have to say please and thank you. Okay, so law is really, really minimal. Ethics is something completely different. Ethics is behavior that inspires relationships, in my view. And so the previous slide to me is legal in all probability, but not ethical. And this is the problem area that we get into so many times when it comes to money. So how do you account for all these scope games? I mean, there's a lot of good ways and a lot of bad ways to do it. Let me show you one of the bad ways. I thought this was a really interesting study done by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And they did a survey of 60 buildings looking for, well, what was the problem? What kind of typical problems did we have in these buildings? And I couldn't help but notice this one. 15% of the buildings they surveyed had missing equipment that was required by the contract, never got installed. Well, I know I had some competitors, and I know what my competitors would have called that. Some of my competitors would have called that profit, right? So that's one way of dealing with those kind of scope games is you cut corners. You don't do everything you are required to do by contract. What happens here then is the building does not perform, obviously, because there's stuff missing. And so the owner is not satisfied. And so you haven't obsessively met their needs, and therefore that relationship erodes. And so graphic evidence here of one way of doing it that is totally inappropriate, but it's done in our industry to the detriment of our whole industry. So what are some of the other things that we can do? Again, we want to make sure that scope and price are always connected. And people that have money ethics problems are always trying to disconnect scope and price. And I just don't think you can allow that at all. Make sure that you don't sign away your rights. Make sure you know what's in that contract in terms of scope. Be really detailed on that. This right here will solve a lot of your ethics problems as it relates to money. You can also increase price and margin, and in my view, that is a perfectly ethical way of dealing with these kinds of issues. I knew in short order when I entered the industry who were the people you could trust, whose word was good, who would try and bid shop you or shop down your price after a bid letting. And one way you could deal with them is simply add some extra money into your bid so that you'd have something to bid with afterwards. That's less ideal, but at the same time, you're protecting your margin. One other, this one's cut corners. We talked about that. That's highly unacceptable. RLH, RLH doesn't get used enough in my mind. You may not know what that term means. It is another acronym. It means run like hell. Okay? That means get out of don't bid that person. Don't do that job. I mean, life is too short to spend arguing these kinds of issues with people that have ethics that are fueled only by money. And so those are, and this one doesn't get used enough. You know, we're all very competitive people, I think, in our industry. And so project comes up for bid, by golly, we're going to bid it. And I don't think that's the right way to approach it. I think you have to look at a project in terms of, can I make money on that project? Is that owner somebody I can develop a long-term relationship with? And then allow your ethics to guide your judgment. So another way of looking at this, of course, is looking at payment issues, and payment issues are always an issue. The standard of care, or the standard in our industry, is you work 30 days, okay? And at the end of 30 days, you put in a payment request, and the owner has 30 days to pay. And so this is kind of unique to our industry, because it means that we better have 60 days of money in our bank or in our company in order to do a project. So then the questions that crop up are, do you get full payment? You know, if I put in a bill at the end of 60 days for $10,000, do I get $10,000? No, generally not. And then the second issue is, when do you get paid? Do you always get paid 30 days after you put in your invoice? And the answer worldwide is pretty much no. That's not what is going on in our industry, to our detriment. So why are we not getting full payment? Well, sometimes it's a contract provision. It's called either retainage or holdback. It goes by a variety of names, but sometimes in a contract, the owner is allowed to withhold 10% of your invoice to cover defective or late work or incomplete work or work that is not in compliance with the contract documents. That's a lot of money. So at the end of the job, you've got 10% of the total contract cost sitting in a bank account, earning interest for the owner. Some they'll add a bond to ensure compliance with contract documents. I've seen owners go ahead and withhold additional money on top of the retainage, and then of course you've got change order work, which may or may not be paid for, which is an issue as well. And then there's just the issue of, well, I'm not going to pay you until I feel like paying you, which harms us. I came from a small family-owned business, and in small family-owned business, cash flow is king. You know, I had to pay my workers every Friday, and so I better have that money in the bank in order to pay them. And so I needed to get paid, and paid consistently. And so this is a big industry-wide issue involving the money game, right? And so I'm starting to see phrases like this. This came from a general contractor, wrote it for a mechanical contractor, and it basically says that if the general contractor doesn't get their money from the owner, then the subcontractor automatically isn't going to get their money from the owner. Well, you know, that to me, this is a very, very poor contract condition. I would never accept it.
You know, if I need to get paid when I'm supposed to be paid, and if the general contractor isn't getting paid, that's their problem. That is not my problem. And then you have the issue of general contractors or owners that have the money and just don't want to pay it out. Well, what's going on there? I did some research. I thought this was really interesting. I took a real life project here in the United States and said, okay, and I asked the contractor for their payment requests over time. And so that's what you see on the screen there. And I asked myself, okay, what happens to the general contractor if he just says, I'm going to sit on everybody's money an extra 60 days? And so I start looking at, okay, how much money would they get in interest? Now, this is pre-pandemic, so this interest rates have gone down pretty much everywhere. But then I, as the contractor, have to go out and take out a loan, loan rate 5%, plus my lost profits. And all of a sudden you can see that by having a general contractor just on this one project, just for this $5 million bucks, would make, or there'd be a loss of around $57,000. That's a lot of money. And so that comes back to our question, where does that money come from? Well, of course, it can only come from one place. It's going to come from the bottom line. So how do you account for all of these kind of gains? Well, you have some front end loading, and that's a term that we use to say, well, instead of telling you what I actually earned in that 30-day period, I'm going to add some extra to it. So I'm going to get my money faster. So if the owner doesn't pay me, I still have enough money to pay my people. Front end loading is an ethical issue. Some countries now are passing prompt payment laws that I like a lot. Here again, you know, you can increase your margin of profit in order to take that into account. You can file a lien. Most countries have some form of lien law that you can invoke in order to attach to the asset and precipitate payment. Here's RLH again. So when you start negotiating for a project, you know what the payment history is of this client. Do they pay on time? Do they pay in full? It's a really big issue. This has got to be a strategy that we consider carefully. And of course, there are other strategies too. I'm sure many of you there have a number of really good ideas on how you've done that in the past. This is an interesting little story to show you the ethical issues with front end loading. If you front end load too much, this was an engineer in New York State. They knew that the government entity that they were working for was very slow paying. Just took forever to get their money. So they front end loaded the job considerably to get more money into their firm quicker. And the problem here is they put the payment request in the mail. And so the government entity got it, decided it was way too front end loaded, and then turned it over to the mail fraud department, the United States government. And this engineer that was to design that, or a bridge like that, ended up going to prison for mail fraud. So there is a line there between fraud and ethics that caught that engineer in that very precarious position. So the last item I want to talk about a little bit is this issue that constantly crops up in terms of change orders, and it's a money issue, okay? So do you get paid for change orders? Who pays for change orders? When do you get paid for change orders? Nobody likes change orders, okay? I can tell you that right now. Owners don't like it because it increases the cost of their building. And at least in the United States, approximately 80% of all buildings in the United States are built with borrowed money. And so change orders impact their ability to finance the job, which is not a good thing at all. Architects and engineers, they really don't like change orders either, because it reflects on, or they believe it reflects on the quality of their work. Contractors, believe it or not, don't like it either, because of the impact these things have, not just on cash flow, but also on productivity, which does also affect cash flow. And as we all know, there's this perception in our industry that contractors not only love change orders, but actively seek them out. Some do, regrettably, to the detriment of all of us. And a lot of it is because of perception. This is one of my favorite pictures. So here we have a boat called Original Contract, and a much, much, much bigger boat that's named Change Order. Well, that's the perception we have in the industry, and it's one of the things that makes change orders so difficult to deal with. And so they are disruptive. They're a disruptive part of our industry, and it's often because of this money issue. Now I'm going to show you something. Please bear with me for just a second. So I'm going to come out of that, and I'm going to show you something that I thought was really interesting. This comes from a different court case than I showed you earlier, and I want to thank this law firm for letting me use this. But this is a change order lawsuit where the owner didn't want to pay the full amount for the change order, and the contractor couldn't afford not to get paid. And so they put together this description of how change orders work, and I thought it really highlighted the problems we face in our industry. So you got a crew out there, and they're doing their thing, right? They're doing whatever the contract says, and lo and behold, a problem crops up. So what do? Well, of course, they evaluate the problem, decide, well, we don't know what to do, so we're going to call the foreman. And that's fine, but then a couple of things happen to us there. The crew stops because they've got a problem and they don't know what to do. And so the foreman comes over, but now the foreman is not supervising the rest of the project like the foreman should. So now I have some dilution there. I have some loss of productivity. So foreman takes a look at this thing and says, well, wait a minute, I don't know what's going on here, so I'm going to call the general foreman. The crew is still not doing anything, right? They're just, they come to a complete halt. So the general foreman evaluates it. He can't figure it out, so he talks to the superintendent, okay? And while this is all going on, these individuals, which should be managing the project, they're not. So that gets diluted. And so superintendent finally says, I can't figure this out either. I'm going to call the engineer, okay? And so you finally get the engineer involved. So the engineer figures out what's wrong, figures out, okay, this is what you need to do to fix it. Crew still isn't doing the work they were scheduled to do. And so issues a change order, change directive, whatever. And finally, okay, you can get the materials and tools and equipment, and the crew can perform the rework. So the issue in this case, and the issue we face, is what does the owner want to pay for? Well, generally, the owner only wants to pay for this little bit here, none of this other stuff. Well, this other stuff takes money out of our back pocket. I mean, it costs time, it costs money. It comes off of our bottom line. And of course, that's the issue. I thought that was one of the best examples I have found to describe that whole situation, describe it in ways that really make sense for us. So, and they call that the do loop. So that's our do loop for the day. So here's some of the issues that change orders cause, and these are all money issues, okay, that impact us. So how does this impact our bottom line? It gets us to our third pillar. And our third pillar is one will get you 29. And where does that come from? It's a gambling term, but it actually comes from a firm's balance sheet. So if you take a typical balance sheet, and I took one, I got this data from the Risk Management Association. And this would be for a small family-owned business like the one I owned. You can see what the typical direct costs, gross profits are. And again, very low margin industry, but it gives you an operating profit of $155,000. Now, if I wanted to increase that 29%, if I wanted to increase that to $200,000 operating profit, how do I do that? What's the best way to get that done? So if you do the math, you find the best way to do that is to lower your direct costs. All you have to do is lower your direct costs by 1%, and you get a 29% increase in operating profit. And that is a core value of our industry. So said another way, a company must decrease direct job costs by about 1% to produce a 29% increase in the bottom line. That's a very powerful statement. And that's got to be also, you know, it's one of our pillars. So it gives us a guidepost, gives us some guidance on how we deal with these money problems that crop up out of change orders. So how do you account for that? It's one of the takeaways we want to have in this discussion of how can you leave the room today and have some things that you can do that help you manage these kinds of money issues in your firm. And so, you know, a lot of contractors do, unfortunately, is they overprice change orders because they've gotten themselves into a scope problem, or they've gotten themselves, or the owner isn't paying promptly, or it's a way to get even, you know. And anytime you get into a situation like that, that is not going to be a good situation. It's one of the things that fuels that perception that change orders are a good thing. Change orders are tough. It's tough for a contractor to get full value out of a change order. The one I like the best is negotiating. Okay, so you know, when you negotiate the contract, you know, change orders are just they happen in our industry. They're simply a part of doing business. You're never going to have a set of contract documents that are perfect. And so how are you going to deal with change orders, either directed change orders or undirected change orders? Well, one way I like is having a shared contingency fund that will fund those change orders. So the owner knows up front, okay, this is how much we've set aside for it. This would be owner money. So any leftover would go back to the owner. You can do the same thing with bonds and warranty reserves. And I've done that before too, and that works. A really good way of getting rid of change orders is using something other than a bid process. I particularly like design build because I'm also an engineer, and so that's one of the services we try to provide. If we can do a design assist or a design build project, and the contractor before construction starts can have some input, we can eliminate many change orders. So that addresses the owner's expectations, and I think that's a really good idea. Also, I found some individuals are really, really good at negotiating in what I call a creative way. Okay, it's an innovative way of negotiating change orders. And so the best example I can give you is a rather dramatic example. It was a very large project, $700 some million wastewater treatment plant, and soon as construction started, general contractor was out there with his bulldozers and out there with their backhoes and the like. And almost immediately they hit Native American burial grounds, which are highly protected in the United States. And so that project came to a roaring stop almost instantly. And then, of course, there were change orders going back and forth. The contractor was delayed and wanted more money. The engineer, of course, wanted a lot more money because now they had to move some things around, because you cannot, in most cases, move a Native American burial ground because of their religious beliefs. And so it just devolved into a horrible money situation involving change orders. And one of the contractors had a really good idea, and he called it forward pricing. And I think it was a really unique way of addressing the problem. He said, look, we know there are going to be issues here in terms of productivity and out of sequence work and moving things around. And those are generally called soft costs, okay? Because they're really hard, we call them soft because they're hard to put a number to. So how do you turn a soft cost into a hard cost? And so what he did, which worked well, I thought, is came up with this process. He said, look, we're going to figure out a way to assess and price these change orders prior to doing any of the work. And as a part of this, I will waive my right to claim against you. You waive your right to claim or liquidated damages against me. We're going to agree not to fight each other. We're going to come up with this process, and that process will guide us for the balance of this project. And so what they did is they went to the change order impact form, which is produced by the Mechanical Contractors Association of America. It's a great form, and it's got like 10 or 12 different areas of additional productivity losses if that condition exists. And so they said, well, what we should do is put that into a graph, and so I will know exactly how much extra labor my multiplier will be for every change order based upon these values. And we'll just come to an agreement now And then that's the way we're going to price all the change orders going forward. And I'll be satisfied and won't file a lawsuit. You'll be satisfied, won't file a lawsuit, and we'll get this job done. And this job started off with just in horrible shape. This job actually ended 3 months early and like $4 million under budget. So they did solve the problem. And they solved the problem by sitting down, negotiating, agreeing something that was fair to both sides. To me, that's the best advice I can give you on change orders generally, is focus on the client, focus on people, focus on being fair to both sides, and coming up with a negotiated settlement before the fight starts. And so I applaud that group of engineers and contractors and owners that came up with that. And I think it's a good lesson there for us. So I see I've got just a couple of minutes left. So here's our summary. I think everybody in the room, regardless of what segment of the industry you are in, needs to develop a corporate strategy to account for scope, payment, and change order gains. So there has to be a strategy in your firm on how you're going to deal with it. We've talked about some options over the course of this 60-minute presentation, and but it's got to be a strategy that works for you. Okay, it's got to be unique to you and your firm. And I encourage all of you to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to deal with these things going forward, and have a plan. And then make sure that you're always focusing on behaviors that promote long-term relationships. That's the secret to a healthy firm. And meeting expectations and making sure the people you work with share your ethics and don't have ethics that focus solely on money. So again, Central Pakistan chapter, thank you so much for inviting me to your chapter meeting. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I think do I have a few minutes left to answer any questions, or?
Thank you very much, sir. We have learned a lot from you today. And yes, there are a few questions, but they will send you by email. So it's an honor. Thank you once again. I hope our participants will also be able to translate today's learning into their practical life. Now it's honor to inform you that Society Treasurer Mr. Farooq Mehboob is with us. With most respectfully, I request you to share a few words of wisdoms with us, sir.
Or you'll have to, yeah. Thank you, Omar. First of all, a correction. I'm not yet the society treasurer. I'm just the nominee for treasurer. So I just want to make that clear. Now,
Okay, sorry, sir. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay. Second up, Tim, I really want to thank you. Fabulous presentation as usual. And what you said today connects with an earlier presentation you had made in Karachi. I believe it was a year or a year and a half ago, on the kind of clients we should choose. And I remember that you put them into boxes of gold, silver, and lead. And so part of this must connect with that, in the sense that we do business, and we do business to make a living. And at the same time, we hope we are not desperate enough to go for really bad clients. And
Yes.
Certainly the takeaway from what you said is the obsessive service to the client is vitally important. On the side of the contractor or the consultant, I think it is very important for us to look at our contracts when we sign up with the client, to see that we are safeguarded from fair to both sides. And the more we look at it, rather than just rush and sign on the dotted line, better our chances are of moving forward. And I certainly agree a negotiated change order is a lot better than an inflated change order. That does not help the situation.
Yep, absolutely.
So once again, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your taking out the time for us.
It's always an honor to be of service to the region at large and to our fine chapters in Pakistan. And so thank you for inviting me. And thank you for letting me be a part of this meeting. I enjoyed it as I knew I would.
And
Thank
you
you.
may be counted as among the friends of region at large. So we never forget our friends, and we really value our friends, and that's our long-term relationship which we try and build. So Tim, you're dear to our hearts, and you're a friend of our region and our chapters, and we hope that this pandemic will get better, and we will have a chance for a face-to-face with you. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
I hope fervently for that as well. I really missed the face-to-face interaction, particularly with my friends in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Sir Farooq Saab. And now I would like to invite Mr. Muhammad Ahmed, Chairman, Pakistan HVACR Society, Lahore Chapter, for vote of thanks for our speaker. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Umar. I, as a chairman of Pakistan HVACR Society Lahore chapter, thanks Mr. Tim Vance for this very informative presentation. I also thank all the Pakistan HVACR members and members of the local council along with the head office team to extend their great support and for their continuous scheduling and participating in the technical webinars. Pakistan HVACR Society and its chapters are committed to bring many more such sessions for its members. I also thank ASHRAE Central Pakistan CTTC Chair for this joint session and President of ASHRAE Central Pakistan Chapter. I appreciate the Society President who has initiated these webinars session during this lockdown for the Society and ASHRAE members, and today it is going good results. Lastly, I would like to announce that Pakistan HVACR head office has scheduled a panel discussion on June 11 at 3:00 p.m. with the top consultants of Pakistan. Topic shall be how to move forward. I request all of you to please sign in once receive the invitation. On behalf of Pakistan HVACR and on behalf of President of the Society and the Climate Ozone Cell, we also request all the members to please observe the Environment Day tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Amir. Now, for closing remarks, I would like to invite Mr. Amir Abbas, CTTC Chair for ASHRAE Central Pakistan Chapter. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Umar. I am assigned for the concluding remarks. Thank you very much, Professor Tim Vance, for accepting our request to be with us. I remember we have been talking to you in order to invite you and visit us as a DL for our chapter and attend a conference here in Lahore, which unfortunately couldn't have it due to this pandemic. But at least we can see you in a wonderful red shirt of ASHRAE. And it is indeed a very useful and informative presentation we just delivered. And I'm sure this is very informative and useful for all the listeners and for all the attendees of this webinar, because this kind of topic is not addressed because we have been listening to so many technical seminars and technical things, but this kind of contractual matters and contractual issues are very important, and I hope that every one of us would take benefit whenever we come across with some similar situation. So at the same time, I'd like to thank you to Ral, to Basil Ambari, to Usama, to Ahmed Noor, Pakistan HVACR Society, Muhammad Amir, for facilitating this webinar for our members. And I wish and I pray that once this pandemic is over, we can invite Professor Tim Vance to visit us in Lahore and deliver this presentation in physical. Thank you very much once again, and hope to see you soon.
I hope to see you soon as well.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Take care
Thank
and
you,
bye.
sir. Thank you very much, sir. Once again, in last, on behalf of ASHRAE, wonderful which is for our participants. Sir, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yes, sir.
You too, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.